Hey kids, it's George Washington here again. I want to tell you more about my life here in the eastern panhandle of West Virginia. In our last episode, you'll remember, I talked about my winter journey up to Fort Le Boeuf. There I delivered a letter from Governor Dinwiddie to the French warning them off of the Ohio Valley. When I returned, I began my military career in earnest. Governor Dinwiddie wanted to immediately confront the French before they could establish control of the Ohio Valley. He organized the Virginia Regiment. He put Joshua Fry of Williamsburg in command, and I was put in second in command as lieutenant colonel. Already, a small force of Virginians was up at the Forks of the Ohio, where Pittsburgh is today, starting to build and construct a fort for defending ourselves. My assignment was to go down to Alexandria, Virginia, and recruit a force of men who would then march up to the Forks of the Ohio and help complete the fort. On our way up, pretty much around Wills Creek, which is Cumberland, Maryland today, we ran into the force that was in charge of constructing the fort. They had been driven off by a large contingent of French who had moved down the river with over 300 canoes and many more men. This commander of the fort building contingent was named Ensign Ward. He reported what had happened and said that the French then immediately began to build Fort Duquesne, where he had abandoned his fort. We had a war council and decided that our forces would continue westward, building a road so that heavy equipment, wagons, and artillery could make it up to confront the French. Ensign Ward, on the other hand, was going to go back to Williamsburg and make a plea to the legislature for more supplies, munitions, and money. We made our way to a place called Big Meadows, and I thought this was an excellent area to defend. It was some high ground surrounded by marshes on all sides except for one, so it was a narrow point of attack for the enemy. We decided to start building a fort at that point. We soon learned that there were French parties in the area. I wanted to go out and make contact with them because I did not want them to be able to report on our strength. So I decided to send out a party of 75 men to seek them out. One night we were told by Half King, remember him from our winter journey, that they knew where a party of the French were camping out. So I sent 40 of my men with Half King's men out at night, and we basically approached the French encampment, which was down below us in a glen. And at daybreak, we attacked them and overwhelmed them immediately. In the middle of the confusion of fighting and organizing the prisoners, we looked around and saw that Half King's men were scalping all the dead and killing the wounded. I tried to stop it and had to basically protect the other prisoners from Half King. Among the dead was the leader of the party, Sieur de Jomonville. His men had claimed he was an ambassador sent by the French to deliver an order to the English to abandon the Ohio Valley. Very similar to what I had just done previously on my trip up to Fort Le Boeuf. But I didn't believe him. I thought he was a spy, and he was just using the ambassador cover as a ruse to get through. Well, soon after that, our leader, Joshua Fry, fell from the horse just in an accident and was killed. So I was then put in command of the Virginia Regiment and made a full colonel. I decided to continue our westward push building the road, but our supplies were not coming in as we had hoped, and we suffered shortages of food and ammunition. We then learned that a large force of French and Allied Indians were heading our way. I made the decision to have our regiment fall back to the fort we had started at Big Meadows. There we strengthened our fortifications, made entrenchments, and named the fort Fort Necessity. Well, on the morning of July 3rd, we were attacked. It was pouring rain as the battle went on all day long. By nightfall, all of our cattle and horses were killed. 1/3 of our men were either killed or wounded. All of our gunpowder was damp. And to make matters worse, the men had broken into the rum. Things were grim indeed, and I was relieved and surprised when the French invited us to parley for terms. Well, I sent out Van Braam, who had been our translator in our winter journey, to see what the terms could be with the French to end the attack. He came back with a rain-soaked document that we could hardly read in the candlelight at night. To make matters worse, Van Braam was really fluent in Dutch and French, but not so good in English. Well, from what we could make out, the terms looked favorable. They were actually going to allow us to march unmolested with our arms out of the fort, and we admitted to the death of Jumonville. And considering the situation, I decided to surrender to their terms. This was the only surrender of my entire military career. Well, the next day, we marched out with our arms, and behind us, the French burned down Fort Necessity. It later came to light that in the terms, I had admitted to being part of the assassination of a French diplomat delivering a letter to the English. There was great indignation, and many denounced Van Braam as either incompetent or treasonous for his terrible translation of the terms. Fortunately for myself, I came under little criticism for my surrender or the confusion around the terms. So then the regiment marched to Wills Creek and then on to Winchester, where we regrouped. During all this time, there was a growing dispute among my officers and myself as to our treatment in comparison to the officers of the Crown. These were English regiments sent over to aid us with the battle against the French. The officers of equal rank were paid less in the colonial regiments than they were with the British regulars. This really ticked us off. It was terrible for recruitment and morale, and I confronted the governor about it. But I got nowhere and made no headway. Even Lord Fairfax convinced the governor to offer land in the Ohio Territory to members of the Virginia Regiment as bounty for their service. However, no changes were made in pay. Well, things got even worse. I learned that all the forces of North Carolina, Virginia, and Maryland were to be consolidated under the command of Governor Sharp of Maryland. Governor Sharp himself was to be commissioned as an officer in the King's Army. Meanwhile, the Virginia Regiment was going to be broken up into 3 parts, each individual independent companies, and I was going to be leader of one company as a captain. This was outrageous. It was a demotion of 3 grade levels after I had been in charge of the entire Virginia Regiment. I thought I should have been in charge of all the forces. Well, I had it. So in October of 1754, I resigned my commission and went alone back to the Potomac River, the mouth of the Potomac, and first visited the Fairfax family at Belvoir. And then I made arrangements to lease and live in Mount Vernon, You see, my brother had passed away during this time, and his widow, Anne, had remarried and was living elsewhere. So this is how I came to first live in Mount Vernon. Then I was determined to put all of my energies into farming the family estate. This is something I thought I really wanted to do at this point in my life. Well, in the next episode, we'll see how well I did at settling down to farming. Until then, this is George Washington saying, so long